Hi everybody, welcome back to another Aurora's True Nature Education video. My name is Joy Thompson and I am the Lead Natural Resources Specialist with Aurora Open Space. And today we are continuing to talk about Aurora water and water quality. And this next activity is about what's called non-point source pollution. So before we get started, I want to remind you that we have some pre-questions for you. So please make sure to go ahead and take a look at those. You can stop the video at any point to answer some of those questions if one of the answers comes up in the demonstration. And we'll also have some post questions for you at the end. So I get this question a lot. What is non-point source pollution? Well, non-point source pollution is pollution that comes into our water every day, but we don't always know where it came from, okay? And a lot of times, what non-point source pollution has to deal with more than anything else is not the water that comes out of your tap, but water that we see near us all the time. So maybe water in a creek, in a lake, in a river, in a pond, in some place close to you. So I want you to think about the closest water source to your house. So maybe that is a creek that's a couple blocks away. Maybe that is the little pond in your backyard. Maybe that is the creek that runs through the natural area behind your school. So think about whatever that water is. Now, where does the water in that come from? Well, the water that comes from that is water that comes, it's rain, it comes from our sprinklers, and it goes through what are called storm drains, which are those drains that are in the streets that you see. When water goes into those, it doesn't go to a treatment plant to get treated. It drains directly to local lakes, rivers, and streams. And what that means is that anything that goes into those storm drains also goes into lakes and rivers and streams. And so today we're going to see why that's important and the kind of a difference that you can make every day, as well as talking about ways to conserve water in our everyday life. So what I want you to do is imagine that this jar, this water, represents that water that's closest to your house. For me, I live in an apartment complex, and a creek called the Piney Creek runs right behind that apartment complex. So I am imagining that this is Piney Creek. So that's what we're going to use today. Okay, that's what I'm going to be calling this, is Piney Creek. So Piney Creek looks pretty clean right now, doesn't it? Well, we are about to change that, okay? So I want you guys to imagine that, I want you to think about how old you are right now, and imagine that we put you and your best friend into a magic time machine and you came out and you were 16. And when you're 16 in the United States, something special happens. That is, you get a driver's license if you pass the test. Well, I want you to imagine that you passed the test and you got your driver's license and you even have a car to drive. Unfortunately, the car is grandma's old car, and it's what we in the adult world call a beater, which means that it's kind of falling apart and it makes funny noises, and your car is not in great shape, but it's still drivable. So you still take it, you still take your friends' places, and at night you park it on your driveway or in your parking spot at home. And unfortunately, what you don't know is that that car is leaking oil because it's in such bad shape. So every night when you park it in that parking space, that oil drips down onto the ground and it runs down the street and it goes into the storm drain. And where do you think that ends up? It ends up in Piney Creek. And so we're going to go ahead and take some of this oil and we're going to pour it right into Piney Creek, okay? Now, one of the things I didn't mention earlier is that Piney Creek is not just a nice little creek that runs behind my apartment, it's a place where animals live. So if you take a look at some of the pictures around this room here, rabbits can live down near Piney Creek, and I actually do see them down at the creek every so often. Coyotes hunt down by the creek, so they may be hunting things like mice and voles and stuff like that down by the creek. Great horned owls nest down by the creek, and so they're also hunting things like mice down by the creek. Lots of birds. This bird over here is a big bird. It's called a great blue heron, and great blue herons eat fish. And they will hunt fish down by Piney Creek. I've seen them down by the creek too. So fish live in there, frogs live in there. Piney Creek is a great place to all kinds of animals and all kinds of wildlife. And now all of a sudden they have to deal with some oil that's in there. But that is not it. So remember I said I'd put you and your best friend in that magic time machine. Your best friend is also 16, but here's the deal with your friend. Ever since they were younger, they've been saving some money. So they've been babysitting and maybe shoveling some snow or mowing some lawns, and they've saved up some money and they bought a brand new car. And every weekend, they want that car to be absolutely beautiful, so they wash it in the driveway or in that parking space. And they're washing off all the bird poop and the bug guts, and they're using soap and they're using wax, and all of that water with all of the soap and wax and everything else runs down the street and into the storm drain and ends up in the Piney Creek. So let's put a little bit of soap into Piney Creek here. And that soap may look nice and it may make your car look fantastic, but I promise you that the animals in that creek are not very excited about bath time. They want that water to be clean and without soap. Okay, so now I want you to imagine that you have a younger brother or sister. This might be easy for you to imagine if you actually have that. And that one day while you're out playing, your younger brother or sister comes along with a bunch of markers and colors all over the room and the wall in your room. And you come home and it's just a mess. And so you and your adults in your house, you get some paint and you paint the walls and you make them nice and pretty again. And then you take the paint and you take the pans that you painted with and the brushes and you hose them off in the driveway. And all that paint washes down the street and it goes into the storm drain, and where do you think it ends up? That's right, it ends up in Piney Creek. So now we have a bunch of paint in the creek to mix with the oil and the soap. And how's that looking right about now? If you were an animal, would you want to live in that? Well, that's not really where most of us would want to live if we were an animal. But it's about to get worse, okay? So your neighbor down the street just put in a lawn and he wants it to be a green lawn, like super green, like the greenest lawn on the block. So he takes some fertilizer and he reads the instructions and he thinks, you know what? If I use twice as much fertilizer as it says to use on here, my lawn is going to be twice as green, right? Well, that's not the way that it works. Unfortunately, if you put too much fertilizer on the lawn, it just throws it up like you might throw up if you ate too much pizza. So instead of going into the lawn and making it more green, that extra fertilizer is going to wash off of the lawn and down in the street and into the storm drain, and it's going to end up in Piney Creek. And what's that going to do? Well, it's going to make a lot of plants grow. And when those plants are growing in that water, they're competing for sunlight, and they're competing for carbon dioxide, and they're competing for nutrients, okay? And a lot of them aren't getting what they need, and they could die. So you end up with a lot of dead plants, and it increases water temperature and makes that a great place for bacteria to grow, which is not something that we want, okay? Now, your other neighbor, or maybe this one's not a neighbor, maybe this is a friend that lives a little further out, has a farm. And on that farm, they're raising some sugar beets and some really cool things like that. And this year there were a lot of grasshoppers that came through. And those grasshoppers are just eating away at those crops. And your friend knows that those grasshoppers can't stay because they need those crops in order to be able to survive. That's their livelihood. So your friend buys some pesticide. And they do the same thing that your neighbor did with the fertilizer. They use too much. They think, you know what, I'm going to use all of it because I want to get rid of all of those grasshoppers. So they do. They put all of that fertilizer onto their crops, but what happens is that the extra runs down the street and into the storm drain and ends up in Piney Creek. And the bad deal with that is that it kills a lot of the animals, a lot of the smaller bugs that live in the creek that actually help to keep that creek a place that's a little bit cleaner. And so now we've got a creek that's really a mess and that not many animals can actually live in because it is so incredibly polluted. But we are not done. So if you have a dog at home and you like to walk your dog, that's great. But has it ever happened that you've been walking your dog and all of a sudden your dog stops and does one of those squatty things and you know what he's going to do next? He's going to leave a nice big poop on the sidewalk, and you don't like that, and you just leave it there because you don't want to deal with it. Well, after that poop dries and bakes in the sun for a little bit, after it rains, the rain washes that poop into the storm drain, and it ends up in Piney Creek. And what do you suppose all the animals in Piney Creek think of dog poop in there? They absolutely don't like it at all. Dog poop spreads a lot of germs, and it can spread a lot of disease. And we don't want that in our creeks. The animals definitely don't want it there for sure. Okay? Now, last but never least, you and your friend are out playing. We're going to get you back in that magic time machine again, actually, and you're going to be 16, and it's going to be, you're in high school, and you're driving down the street, and get some McDonald's, and as you go to take your straw wrapper off to put your straw in your soda, the straw wrapper goes flying out the window, and you think, oh no, I just littered. But then your friend says, oh, that's not a big deal. It's just a little straw wrapper, don't worry about it. Well, guess what? We live in Aurora, which is a city of almost 400,000 people. Can you imagine if every person in Aurora accidentally let paper fly out the window from their car? What would be in those storm drains? What would go down the street and end up in Piney Creek? It could be really messy. It could look really bad, kind of like this. So this is what our creek looks like after all those things go into it. And here's the bad news. You know, Piney Creek is not necessarily our drinking water, but it will flow downstream and eventually into rivers that become somebody's drinking water. And those people that have to clean that water have to work extra hard to get all this nastiness and all these chemicals and all this dog poop and all this disease out of the water. Not to mention the fact that it's in your neighborhood, okay? And it's affecting the quality of the water right there for the wildlife and for the people who might be playing in it. Could you imagine playing in a creek that's had all this stuff in it? We would never want to do that. And if it looked like this, we wouldn't go in the water. But this happens every day. So it's up to us to make sure things like this don't happen. Now that you know this, you know more than a lot of grown adults do. So this is something that you could actually share with your family. You saw everything that I put in here. It's just water and some soap and oil, some sprinkles and food coloring. You can show this to your family and can show what happens if we're not careful and if we allow everyday pollutants to go down into the storm drain. Our water could end up really in poor shape. So how can we stop this? Well, if you've been walking on the trail, you've probably seen places where they have dog poop bags, so you can pick up after your dog. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but it's better than letting it go into the water. We can also take our car to a mechanic to get it fixed if it's leaking oil. Just like we have doctors for our bodies, we can take a car to a mechanic, and that's like a doctor for that mechanic that'll fix that car. Instead of washing our car in the driveway, we can take it to a car wash. That water actually gets cleaned and treated and it never goes into the creek, okay? We can use the right amount of fertilizers and pesticides instead of using too much. We can make sure that we get rid of paint a different way. We put it down the sink instead of putting it down your driveway so that it goes into the storm drain. And one of the most important things we can do is put litter in the trash can and things that can be recycled into the recycle bin, because that keeps this paper out of the watershed, okay? So that's a little bit about non-point source pollution and about some of the things that we can do to help keep our water cleaner. Now, not only do we want to keep our water cleaner, but we want to keep more of it around. There's not that much water. If you watched the video on all the water in the world, we know that less than 1% of it is actually usable. So we want to find ways to take care of that. And we want to find ways to conserve it to make sure that it's around. So we can do things like turning off the water when we brush our teeth. We can take shorter showers. We can think about using less water when we do things like wash dishes, wash laundry. We cannot let the water run. That's one of the biggest things that we can do. And there are many other ways to conserve water and to take care of our water and keep it clean. And you can ask your teacher for some resources so that you can look up ways that you and your family can make sure that our water stays clean and that we have a lot more of it for a long time to come, okay? So thank you for being around today, and on one of our next videos, we'll be talking about some of the animals that live in the water and what it can tell us about the water we live in. Stay tuned.